Marry him, or leave this house tonight. Annie stood frozen in the middle of the dining room. Her adoptive mother, Margaret, pointed toward the man standing near the front door. His clothes were old, his shoes were worn, and his hands were rough from years of working as a security guard at a shopping mall. His name was Cole. To everyone in the room, he was nothing more than a poor gateman. Annie looked at him with tears filling her eyes. "Mother, please. You promised me I could finish college." Margaret laughed coldly. "College? With whose money? You should be grateful that I even raised you." Annie lowered her head. She had heard those words her entire life. She had been adopted when she was only 6 years old. But Margaret never treated her like a daughter. Annie cooked. She cleaned. She washed clothes. She took care of Margaret's biological children. And whenever Annie complained, Margaret reminded her of one thing. "You were an unwanted child. We gave you a home." That night, however, Margaret had something else planned. Her family had fallen into serious debt. A wealthy businessman had offered to help them, but only if Margaret married her daughter to his spoiled son. Unfortunately for Margaret, her biological daughter refused. So she turned to Annie. And chose the poorest man she could find. Cole. Margaret believed Annie would be miserable with him. She was wrong. The next morning, Annie packed her tiny suitcase. She looked around the house she had spent 18 years cleaning. Not a single person came to say goodbye. Except Cole. He stood outside in the rain, holding a broken umbrella. "I know you didn't choose this," he said quietly. Annie wiped her tears. "Neither did you." Cole smiled. "Then maybe we can choose what happens next." Those words stayed in Annie's heart. They married quietly at a small courthouse. There were no flowers, no expensive wedding dress, no guests, no celebration. Just two people who had been pushed into a life neither of them had expected. After the wedding, Cole took Annie to his apartment. It was tiny. One bedroom, one old sofa, a kitchen with a broken cabinet. Annie looked around. "This is okay," she whispered. Cole looked embarrassed. "I promise I'll give you something better someday." Annie shook her head. "I don't need something better. I just need someone who doesn't make me feel worthless." Cole didn't know what to say. That night, Annie cried silently. Not because she had married a poor man. She cried because, for the first time in years, someone had treated her like she mattered. Days passed. Cole went to work every morning as a gateman. Annie found a job at a small bakery. They struggled. Sometimes they had only enough money for one proper meal. Cole would pretend he wasn't hungry so Annie could eat. And Annie would secretly save half of her food so Cole could eat later. Neither knew that the other was making the same sacrifice. One rainy evening, Cole came home exhausted. Annie noticed his shoes were completely soaked. "You need new shoes," she said. Cole laughed. "Maybe next month." Annie took the little money she had saved and bought him a new pair. When Cole saw them, he stared at her. "You bought these for me." Annie smiled. "You deserve something new too." Cole turned away because he didn't want her to see his tears. But Annie noticed. And she hugged him. For the first time in his life, Cole felt what it meant to have a real family. Months passed. Annie became pregnant. Instead of becoming weaker, she worked harder. She started making homemade pastries in their tiny kitchen. At first, she sold them to neighbors. Then to office workers. Then to small shops. Her food became popular. One customer told another. Soon, people were waiting outside their apartment every morning. Annie had discovered something she was good at. And she refused to give up. Cole supported her every step of the way. But Annie didn't know something about her husband. Something he had hidden from her. Something that would change everything. One evening, while Annie was sleeping, Cole received a phone call. "Yes," he said quietly. "Tell the board I will attend the meeting tomorrow." The voice on the other end asked, "Sir, how long are you planning to continue living like this?" Cole looked toward the bedroom. "As long as my wife needs to know that someone loves her for who she is." The caller sighed. "Sir, you are the owner of the entire corporation. You don't need to work as a security guard." Cole replied, "I know." The truth was, Cole wasn't poor. He wasn't a gateman. He was the secret billionaire behind one of the largest retail companies in the country. He had deliberately lived a simple life because his father had once warned him. Money will show you who wants you, and who wants your money. Cole had been betrayed before. So he wanted to find someone who would love him without knowing his wealth. He never expected to find Annie. 2 years passed. Annie's little bakery became a successful business. She had worked from a tiny kitchen while pregnant and had built everything with her own hands. Then one morning, a black luxury car stopped outside the bakery. A group of executives stepped out. They bowed when Cole walked toward them. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." Annie froze. She looked at her husband. "Mr. Cole." One executive handed him a folder. "Your company is ready for the acquisition meeting." Annie stared at the documents. Her hands began shaking. "Cole, what is this?" He looked at her. "I wanted to tell you." "Tell me what?" "I own the company." Annie couldn't speak. "The company that owns half the shopping malls in this city." Cole nodded. Tears rolled down Annie's cheeks. "You let me think you were poor." "I did." "Why?" Cole stepped closer. "Because I needed to know whether someone could love me without loving my money." Annie cried. "And," Cole smiled, "I found the answer." But the biggest shock came that evening. Margaret arrived at their house. She had heard everything. The poor Gateman she had forced Annie to marry was actually a billionaire. Margaret suddenly changed. "Annie, my daughter." Annie looked at her. "Your daughter." Margaret reached for her hand. "I made mistakes. I was angry. I didn't know." Annie gently pulled her hand away. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Margaret's face fell. "You treated me like a servant when you thought I had nothing." She pointed toward Cole. "And now you call me your daughter because you think he has everything." Margaret began crying. "Please forgive me." Annie was silent for several seconds. Then she said something Margaret never expected. "I forgive you." Margaret looked up hopefully. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to return to the life you gave me." Annie took Cole's hand. "I spent my whole life believing I wasn't worth loving." She smiled through her tears. "Then I met a man who had everything, but chose to live with me when I had nothing." Cole squeezed her hand. Annie continued. "You taught me that family isn't the people who give you a roof." She looked at her husband. "Family is the person who gives you a reason to feel safe under that roof." Margaret left in silence. Years later, Annie's bakery became one of the most successful businesses in the city. But she never forgot where she started. She opened a foundation for abandoned and adopted children. Its first building was named the Annie Hope Center. On the opening day, Cole stood beside her. Their little daughter held Annie's hand. A journalist asked Annie, "What is the greatest thing you've ever received?" Everyone expected her to say money, or success, or her husband's fortune. But Annie smiled. "The greatest thing I ever received wasn't wealth." She looked at Cole. "It was the chance to discover that I was never worthless." Cole kissed her forehead. And Annie finally understood something she had spent her entire childhood searching for. Sometimes, the person everyone treats like they are nothing, is the person who deserves everything. And sometimes, the poorest looking person in the room is hiding the richest heart. If this story touched your heart, remember, never judge someone's worth by their clothes, their job, or their bank account. You never know what someone has survived, or what they may become.